I would say I'm not used to that work.
Na clapist you leis no bushin.
Welcome back to Ní Ansa, Not Difficult in Old Irish. This is the research podcast of the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. My name is Nina Cnockaert-Guillou, and today I'm talking to Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
That's right. Today I, Victoria Krivashokova, am talking to Dr Nina Cnockaert-Guillou, and she will tell us all about her love for Cork and manuscripts, her research on medieval Irish literature, and the wonders of Narutology. Enjoy! So, I want to say welcome to the podcast, but you have literally been on every episode already, just in a different seat. But I guess welcome to the hot seat today.
Thank you.
And now it's time for you to answer the questions. So you are, like myself, an international scholar here at the school. You come to us from France. And I know that your origin story as a Celticist starts in Cork. But can you tell us more about your journey that led you to Ireland and then to Dias?
Yes, thank you. So I'm from France, as you said. And my family on my mom's side is from Brittany. And so I grew up listening to tales of King Arthur and all sorts of Celtic related things. And then as I was growing up, I got really interested in English and I started learning English, and I went to college in Paris and did a degree in English, and then came the opportunity to do an Erasmus. And by then I was really obsessed with Ireland. I really wanted to come live here and to study here because I wanted to learn Irish. And at the time I didn't know what Old Irish was. I just wanted to learn the living language. So I did Erasmus in Cork, and well, it was so amazing. I was really welcomed by the Department of Early Medieval Irish, with whom I ended up taking quite a few classes during my Erasmus. And I was introduced to Old Irish by Dr. Kevin Murray. And it really snowballed from there. They were so welcoming, people were so nice, and Kevin especially was really supportive and saw that I took an interest in Old Irish, and so he suggested that I do a master's, and he helped me with the application and kind of funding applications as well. And then he was my supervisor, and he helped me with PhD applications after that. So really it was all started in Cork, and I have everyone in the department to thank for everything they taught me and their help with things afterwards. And so then I went on to do a PhD in Cambridge, and then after that I came to Dias.
Well, that's quite a journey. And I know that throughout all of these different degrees that you did, a big topic in your research has been the fíanaigecht, and also the text called Agal of Nashor. And so I want to ask you, of course, what is this text? What is so unique about it? And most importantly, how many Agallamh are there?
Yes, so that's a very big question. So when I started my master's in Cork, Kevin suggested that, he suggested different topics that I could do for the master's, and I ended up settling on the edition of fíanaigecht text, so a text associated with Fionn McCool, or Fionn McCool, the legendary hero. And so that's how I got into this corpus of texts associated with Fionn. So I edited that for my master's, and then for my PhD I went on to work on a story which is tested before the Agallamh, but then becomes incorporated into the Agallamh, so the colloquy of the ancients, as it's commonly translated. And so this text is basically a massive narrative, which is based on the premise that ancient warriors who used to hang out with Fionn, but Fionn has died, and they have actually lived on for centuries until the time of St. Patrick's coming to Ireland. And so then they meet Patrick and he baptizes them, and then they tell him loads of stories about how places in Ireland got their names. And so the story that I was working on for my PhD is part of one of the stories that are being told along the way. So that was how I got into the Agallamh, and I'm still working on the Agallamh. And as you said, there's several versions. So there's an earlier, the earliest kind of version that we have, which is attested in at least 4 manuscripts, and then so that though the manuscripts are a bit later, but we think that was written perhaps in the early 13th century. And then after that, there was another Agallamh text, which was written called Agal of Nashor, which is only attested in 1 manuscript, and that's a shorter text, but it doesn't reuse exactly the same material than the earlier Agallamh, and it's the premise is a bit different. The warriors just run away from Patrick from the start. They're just scared of Patrick, and they just run away and tell stories to each other instead. So it's quite a fun text. And then after that, so you have to jump a few centuries after that, and so there was a bigger, longer Agallamh rewritten using both of these two early Agallamh, or Agallamh in the Old Irish version. And so this text is commonly called the Reeves Agallamh, or Agallamh Ado, the second Agallamh. And so that's an extremely expanded version which reuses the earlier texts. So it's quite complex, and there's very little work that's been done on this, but that's what I'm currently working on. And then again, after that, we have an Agallamh which Síle ní Mhaonaigh in Cork has called Agal of Nashor, and she's written an article on this, and that's it's a text which reuses certain episodes from the earliest Agallamh, but it's a text which only survives in 18th century manuscripts and later, and so it's clear that it's a modernized version of selected episodes, basically, which are reorganized in a different order, and the manuscripts differ sometimes significantly in the order of episodes in which ones are included. And then finally, after this, we have another Agallamh, which unlike all the ones that I just mentioned, isn't a prose or prosymmetric narrative. It's a poetic narrative, and so that's a compilation of long poems and lays which form a dialogue between Patrick and Oisin, who's the son of Fionn, and so that's called Agal of Padraig agus Oisin, or Oisin agus Padraig.
Okay, that's very impressive, and your knowledge of these things is equally as impressive. And I think it's fair to say at this point that you're probably one of the world's leading specialists on the Agallamh and its various versions. So I want to ask you, do you have your favorite version?
Well, that's really difficult. I think, well, like a lot of people, I started working on the earliest version first. But as I've gone on now to work on the Reeves Agallamh, so the kind of early modern massive rewriting, I really like it. I think it's fascinating. Very few people have worked on it, so there's so much to do. And I think it's extremely creative in the way it reuses the earlier texts. And because the earlier texts are themselves long and complex, this text itself is even more, like, it's longer, it's more complex, it's it's doing great things, and I'm a big fan of early modern Irish narratives at the moment, so yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. And well, as we understand now, Agallamh is kind of like a collection of narratives within a bigger narrative. So my next question for you is, what are some of your favorite stories from the Agallamh?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah. Well, I have to talk about the story that I worked on for my PhD because it's a pretty cool story, and it's told across, like, there's different tales, and they all kind of form a collection of stories. So there's 4 stories, and they don't really have titles, but they're about the 3 mysterious men and the dog of Iruath, a mysterious place. And so what's great about this story is that it's 3 men who come to join Finn's warrior band, and they kind of cause trouble, and they have a magic dog, and that's the reason why they're allowed to stay with Finn and with his fían, his warrior band. But the great part about it is that at the end, in the last tale, there's some invaders that come and bother Finn, and he asks the 3 men for help, and so then the dog farts the invaders away out of Ireland. So that's just an extremely funny ending to these 4 tales. But there's also another episode which I think is just hilarious because so Patrick is traveling around Ireland with Cumaill, and his chariot breaks down, and so he's just waiting on the side of the road, and then some random guy just comes by in his own chariot and helps Patrick and decides to give him his chariot. And then serendipitously, at this exact moment, the daughter of a king comes by asking Patrick, "Oh, I need someone to marry." And so he's like, "Well, you can marry the man who just helped me with my chariot. I just gave him loads of lands." So I just think that like, my chariot broke down on the side of the road, and now we have a cool episode thing is really funny. So yeah.
Yeah, these are very interesting things, and very, I think, humorous as well in a way. And my next question would be then, so with this huge collection of material, obviously you read it, you enjoy it, but how does one even go about studying it in an academic way? So I know that one of the methodologies you use in your research is narratology. So I wanted to ask you, what is narratology, and how can we apply it to medieval sources? And maybe, are there any other cool and exciting methodologies that you use?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of narratology, and it's something that I got into during my PhD especially. So narratology, I think, is often defined as the study of the structure and the functions of narratives, and it goes back to mid-20th century theorists like Gérard Genette, who worked on, basically they wanted to find a common ground to all narratives. So it was very much not concerned, they wanted to find rules that would apply to all narratives. But as well, I'm working on medieval or early modern texts, it doesn't work. Obviously, these texts are very different from modern fiction and from modern narratives. And so obviously the field has evolved since then, and there's been loads of work recently on historical or diachronic narratology. So Monica Fludernik in 2003 published an article where she called for a diachronization of narratology. So she called for people to start working on the evolution of narrative features throughout time. And then more recently, Eva von Konzen has also published an article in 2014, I think, in which she called for a medieval narratology. And so she pointed out that a lot of literary theory and narratology theory has been focusing on modern narratives, and that obviously this doesn't always apply to medieval texts. And so she's basically, in that article, which is really great and I would recommend, she sets out kind of things that we need to do working on medieval texts and understanding how they work, how they function, what features are there that then evolve throughout time. So that was, I think those kind of 2 articles were really important in setting the stage for looking at medieval texts and looking at the evolution of narratological features. So I've been using this a little bit and kind of dipping toes into the field of narratology for my study of the Agallamh, because, as I said, the Agallamh, it's what we call a frame narrative. So there's stories within a bigger story, and they're told by a narrator who's himself a character within the story. So it's very complex. And so that's how I got into this. And there's loads more things to study, the role of the narrator, how characters are introduced, the beginnings, the endings of narratives, the scene changes, all sorts of different things. So yeah, I think it's something that's really fruitful for us to understand how texts function, what effects they have on us readers. And it doesn't mean, I know, well, in the field of medieval Irish especially, it's not something that people use often because, well, literary theory in general isn't really something that's used in medieval Irish that often. But I think that it's extremely useful in shedding new light on texts and in making us see them as stories, as just tales, and they're really fascinating to understand. And it doesn't mean that we're saying that medieval authors and writers decided or knew about these features, but it's just a way of interpreting what's there and the evidence. And so it's really, for me, it's going from the texts, what's there, and how can we interpret what's there using theories, which of course are modern interpretation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And your answer resonates a lot with me as well, because I also like to apply modern methodologies to medieval texts, not necessarily because they themselves used the same methodologies in their work, but I think it's very useful. And so, of course, on the one hand, you have this very complex narrative structure to the text that you have to deal with. But on the other hand, as you said, the textual tradition of the Agallamh spans many centuries. And so to be able to work with that, you also need to be proficient in your knowledge of different stages of the Irish language. And I know that, of course, your linguistic skills are not to be trifled with. You can tackle material in Old Irish, Middle Irish, Early Modern, and Modern Irish, which is super impressive. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you think your knowledge of the earlier stages of language helps you to understand the later ones, and vice versa?
Yes, so, I don't thank you for my linguistic skills. I am perpetually lost in the stages of the Irish language, to be honest. As I was saying earlier, when I first moved to Ireland, I wanted to learn Modern Irish. So I started learning Modern Irish, but then I was also doing a class in Old Irish. And it just came to a point where I was very confused as to what was happening. And so in my Modern Irish class, I was asking the teacher about infix pronouns. And in my Old Irish class, I was like, where is the lenition? I can't see it. What is this? Why do you not mark this here? So it's taken me quite a number of years to get to grips with the different stages of the Irish language. And I'm at a stage now where my I've kind of gone chronologically, so Old Irish, then Middle Irish, Early Modern Irish, and now I'm working as much as I can on my Modern Irish, and I'm getting, I think, to a stage where I can see the links and where they're really helping me. So, for example, I'd be reading a text in Middle or Early Modern Irish, and I'd look up a few words, and then in the evening I'd be reading a novel in Irish, and I'd see a word and be like, oh, that's the word that I saw in my text that I was studying today. So I'm starting to make connections, but it's extremely, I think for me, it's been difficult to separate, to leave the languages in their own chronological categories, to be because I just end up, I really like the Middle Irish orthography of, unstressed vowels can be spelled any way you want, and it does play tricks on you when you're trying to text people in Irish and they don't understand what you're trying to say because you've spelt things the old way. I think it's really useful to have earlier Irish to understand modern Irish and vice versa. Obviously, the level of vocabulary that you'll have if you have modern Irish, and then you're trying to learn earlier stages of the language is extremely useful, because even though the language has changed and been modernized and some words are perhaps not as usual now, it's still vocabulary that existed before, and so it'll be really useful. So yeah, but it's a long journey learning a language. So
yeah, but still, that's really, really impressive to me, because you're not a native Irish speaker yourself, but you have made such big progress. So that's really, really something for other people to aspire to as well. And so to continue with our discussion of the different aspects of the Agallamh and how to study it, obviously you also have to work a lot with manuscripts that contain the different versions and the different copies of the text, which in itself requires a lot of other different skills from the areas of codicology and paleography. And so what does this kind of work entail for you? And maybe also a personal question from me. I myself work with medieval manuscripts predominantly, and so I always find early modern handwriting extremely difficult to read. So I wanted to ask you, how do you find it?
yeah, so I love manuscripts. I'm a big fan of manuscripts. I think they're beautiful, and it's really makes you realize that the texts you work on they're material. They're an artifact that was written by someone at some point, in the 14th and the 12th century, in the 17th. It's beautiful to hold one in your hands and to think, this was transmitted through the centuries, through generations of families. It's really just a beautiful thing. Now, of course, my love of manuscripts has been helped by ISOS, the repository of Irish manuscripts, digitized versions of Irish manuscripts, which is hosted by DIAS, which really helps you study manuscripts, because you don't have to leave your desk. You can just log on and find the manuscripts you're working on. So at the early stage of my studies, that was really useful, because the manuscripts I worked on were all digitized, and so it was really easy for me to just learn how to read the script and everything. And now that I am working on more, later, early modern kind of material, a lot of manuscripts are not digitized, so it means that you have to go to the libraries and everything. And as you said, the script changes quite a lot, well, especially the change from vellum to paper, and I think that's what makes the script more difficult, is that the support is different, and so they write in a different way. They probably take less care, and so it can look a bit scribbly in the way they write, but I think it's just a question of getting used to a certain scribe, because at first I was also a bit daunted by the early modern manuscripts. But once you get used to a certain scribe and their way of writing and the way they form their letters and the abbreviations they use, then it just becomes easier. And they also use different abbreviations sometimes from the medieval scribes. So that's also just a bit of a learning curve of like, oh, this is strange, I've never seen this before. And then you realize what it is for, and it just becomes easier. But I can't remember the first part of your question. Yeah, so that's just the fact with the need for using manuscripts is not only that they're amazing and cool and they need to be studied, but it's also that for the Agallamh and for loads of other texts, you need to go to the manuscripts because they have not been published. The text of the Agallamh, for example, is extant in quite a lot of manuscripts, and there's loads of different variations. And the editions that exist are not detailed enough. They don't show the variation well enough for you to understand where it changes, which means that then you have to go back to the manuscripts and you have to learn to read, to translate, to understand them yourself. And to me, it's a bit of an Indiana Jones moment, like you're reading, you're doing your own thing, and it's the 15th century manuscript. You're taking the text directly from it, and perhaps only a handful of people have ever read that sentence before, and you're using it for your own research. So it's really exciting stuff, for me at least.
Yeah, this is really, really cool. And seeing how you combine all these different things, linguistics and paleography and other methodologies from literary studies to approach your sources. Obviously, this work has resulted in quite a few publications already, even though you're still quite early into your career. So even in the last couple of months, you published not one, but 2, I believe, articles, and you have something exciting in the works at the moment as well. So I just want you to talk us through some of your own favorite publications.
Yeah, so I've had 2 articles published like within a week of each other, which was really insane because, well, as all academics listening will know, it takes years, months and years to write these articles, submit them for publication, for the whole publication process to take place. So when things come out, it looks like you've been really efficient, but this is like stuff you did a year ago or 2 years ago. So I have a couple of articles on the things I was talking about earlier, which were published. I have an article in the CMCS journal that was published in the autumn last year, on where I use narratology to discuss the Agallamh especially, and to show how meta-narrative features are extremely interesting, and they reflect a high understanding of textual structure from the writers. And so that was a part of my PhD, which I submitted to CMCS, and I was really proud of that chapter. So I hope the article is useful for people. And then the other 2 that were published more recently were an article in Studia Celtica Fennica, it's an article in which I discuss the manuscripts of the Agallamh, and how the structure of the Agallamh as a text is reflected in the layout of the manuscripts. And so I argue that it really shows engagement on the part of later medieval readers in the structure of the text, and that they understood that this was a frame narrative with Patrick listening to stories told by somebody else, and so that was really another chapter of my PhD that I was really proud of. And then the other article is the one that was published in Celtica, and that's based on my master's thesis. So that's an edition of the Old Irish fíanaigecht tale that I worked on for my master's. But the one that I'm actually really excited about at the moment is the one that will come out hopefully at the end of the year in ZCP, and so that's based on, that's my latest research really, that what I've been doing for the O'Donovan, and it was really like a magical moment because I was investigating manuscripts of the later Agallamh, the Reeves Agallamh. And so I was looking through basically all the different manuscripts that people have said, there's a version or maybe a copy or a partial copy of this. And so I was going through the manuscripts, and there was one manuscript that people were saying, it starts like the Reeves Agallamh, but then it's different. And no, it seemed like nobody had published on it further. Like everyone just said, it's a bit different. And so I didn't see the manuscript. I actually haven't seen the manuscript in person yet, but I'm planning to. But I used a microfilm, so an old, kind of older, not digitized, but a film version of the manuscript. And I started reading it, and I was like, this is strange. There's something there. It's very familiar. It's definitely the Agallamh, but it's not the Reeves Agallamh. And so then I kept working on this, and I was preparing a talk, and I had a big light bulb moment in my kitchen at like 10 p.m. trying to finish a talk, and I was like, this text looks very much like one of the versions of the early Agallamh. And then I compared the text to that one manuscript of the early Agal of Rawlinson B487, and it corresponded. And I was like, oh my God, this is an early version of the Acallam. And it was just this massive light bulb moment. I was like, I can't believe this has been sitting here. And it just goes to show that there's so many manuscripts sitting in libraries that nobody's had time to read. They're not digitized. They're barely catalogued. If they're catalogued, there's a very general description. So it was, I guess I was the first person to actually read through this and then see the connection with that earlier version of the Agal. So that's the article that hopefully will come out at the end of this year, in which I go through, I discuss other manuscripts of the Reeves Agallamh, and I've identified a few other different things that were quite cool as well. But this was really the big discovery where I was like, this is an earlier version. It adds a manuscript to the earlier Agallamh. This is just fantastic. So I was really excited about this. And then, of course, the first person I told was Kevin Murray in Cork, because he's also Agallamh obsessed. And so we had a big like fan club moment about this discovery. So yeah, I hope that then I'll be able to publish an edition of the text, and that we'll be able to compare it to the other versions.
This is super exciting. And I was also there partially for this moment. It's always so encouraging to see people discovering these connections that maybe no one else has discovered before. And of course, I know all about it because we share an office. But maybe for other people who are not as lucky as myself, could you please tell us about just your normal working day, what it's like when you don't make huge discoveries?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's true that like that was one big discovery, like years of research. The other discoveries are just very slow and tedious. But yeah, a normal day, well, at the moment, there's a lot of admin involved because, well, we're doing a podcast, so that involves a lot of admin. And I'm also organizing a conference in May, which involves also a lot of prep work. But usually I'll have maybe an article to prepare or to correct after peer review. Perhaps a paper for a conference or for a seminar to prepare. So for these things, usually there's a lot of reading involved. I always start from the text I'm working on, and then whatever I find in that text that I think is interesting, then I go read up on secondary literature, see if there's any parallels that people have identified that would inform my reading of the text. And then I just end up having to write presentations, articles, PowerPoints. I spend loads of time on PowerPoints for conferences, as you know. But yeah, as I think everybody on the podcast has said, loads of reading of primary sources, of secondary sources, and hopefully by the end of the day you've written 3 lines and you feel proud and then you start again the next day.
That's true. That's very relatable. But then also you mentioned that sometimes you would go to libraries to look at your manuscripts, for example, the Royal Irish Academy. And maybe for listeners who haven't been to a manuscript library, what does that look like? Yeah,
so those days are actually really exciting. There's a lot of prep that goes into going to see a manuscript, especially when you have to travel and it's not a library that's close to you. So I think the first time that I went to see Agal of manuscripts was in Oxford, because one of the manuscripts isn't digitized, so I had to go see it in person. And they also allowed me to see one of the ones that are digitized, which is my favorite manuscript of the Agal of the Laud Miscellaneous 610. And it's beautiful. I would really encourage anyone listening to go see it. It's available online, and the decorations are just magical to see. And you can see the fingerprints of people who were doing the colors on the letters, and so you can see their fingerprints on the paint or the ink that they used, and it's just mind-blowing to me. But that's the kind of cool part. But the kind of more serious academic work that goes into this is to make sure you need to book your appointment with the librarians. You need to explain why you need to see certain manuscripts, which might be restricted because they're very fragile. And usually, basically, you try to do everything you can before seeing the manuscript in person so that you're really prepared. And then when you get to see the manuscript, you can just check, say, for example, readings that weren't legible online or through the microfilm that you used. You check physical aspects of the manuscripts, especially if you're working on the way the pages, the quires are put together. So you might be able to see if a page has been cut or added and things like that. And I really like to see as well, the physicality of the manuscript really changes your perspective on the object itself. But these are exciting days, but very long, very intense, and usually afterwards you need quite a bit of a break to just think. But I think the main part the main thing that I try to do is take pictures if the library allows it, because what I found is you will always forget something, or there'll always be something that you didn't think of on the day, and then a few weeks later you're like, oh no, I should have checked that page, or I should have checked that thing. And if you've traveled a bit to go see the manuscript, you can't just go back and knock on their door and be like, hey, can I see it again? So I usually try to take as many pictures as I can of the things that I think will be useful for later study and for later research.
All right, thank you. This is, I think, would be very interesting for people to hear how this works, because I think people who don't get to see manuscripts regularly, like some of us do, it's a big mystery. Yeah. What happens when you look at the manuscript? But then I also wanted to talk a bit more about your non-academic activity. As you mentioned, you are one of the driving forces behind this podcast, but I also know that you were an active member of the Association of Celtic Students, which, as the name suggests, is a community for students of various Celtic cultures and languages, not only Irish. And so I wanted to ask you what your role was at the association and what were your proudest achievements?
Yeah, so this is a big part of my life until quite recently, and I miss it. I joined the association in 2019 when I was just a baby master's student at the time. And so I joined as social media officer. So then for the next kind of 4 years, I was in charge of all the social media of the association. And when I joined, it was quite a small, kind of mostly Scottish gathering of students. And the year that I joined, 2 other people, Stefan O'Brien and Freya Smith, joined. And so the 3 of us kind of took it on from there. There was a bit of a changing of the guard, as it were, at the time, because the people who'd founded the association, so Christopher Lewin was one of the founding members back in 2012, and so he was at the end of his studies and he needed to pass on the torch. So this association is it was a big part of my student life. I think I would have felt extremely alone without the community that the association provides to students of, as you said, Celtic languages, literatures, history. So Irish, Scottish Gaelic, Manx, Cornish, Breton and Welsh. And through the annual conferences that the association organizes, I've met so many people who work on so many different aspects of these languages and cultures, both medieval and modern. And it's been really eye-opening and humbling, because you realize just how much work is going on and how many people study this. And often these are people who are very lonely. They're the only person in their department who works on that. Their supervisor might not be a specialist either, and they're just like, oh, I wish I had friends. And then you end up going to a conference and you realize that loads of people care about the same things you care about. And it's just, honestly, it was, I would recommend to any people currently studying Irish, Gaelic, anything, Breton, Welsh, to join the association, to go to a conference, which have been held both online and in person since the dreaded 2020 fiasco, let's just say, and they're really we've tried as much as we could to make them as accessible as possible. One thing that we have always been really proud of is that we encourage people to present in the languages. So we usually have presentations in Irish, in Gaelic, in Welsh, and then every year there's always at least one or a few presentations in Breton, in Cornish, and in Manx. And so we always offer simultaneous interpretation for the people who can't understand these languages. So this is something that we're really proud of, that the association really encourages people to use the languages, not just to study them, and to use them, they're living languages, living cultures. And it's really fantastic to see all these people working on this. And it's been the support system that it gives you as well as part of the committee. You just have regular meetings, and obviously you end up chatting about life. You become really good friends with people, and Simon and Stefan and Freya have become extremely good friends of mine, and loads of other people who will know, if they listen, they will know who they are. We've become quite a tight-knit group of friends, and so I was social media officer for a while, and then my last year in the association I became chairperson, and kind of passed on the torch then when I finished the PhD. But I think my proudest achievement in the association was to have helped grow the association to really an international organization, because now we have always people traveling from all over Europe, Poland, France, obviously the UK and Ireland, but then also people from the US and from Canada traveling for the conference or attending online. And I think that it's become quite an important event on the Celtic Studies annual calendar, and I'm really glad that we've been able to do this. And of course we also, there's a podcast that I started in 2020 when I was bored, and then that snowballed into quite a big task. There's a blog as well, which is regularly updated, and the association is present on all sorts of social media. So people who are still in the association now, who are driving it, I think they're doing a great job. And one thing that's really important about this is that it's organized by students for students. These are all people who have PhDs to do, they have masters to do, they have exams to take or correct, and thesis to write, and all the work that they do is on the side. And it's just, I think it's become extremely professional for what it is, and proceedings of the conferences are published. They're peer reviewed. It's become quite a professional association in itself, despite the fact that it's all students for students. So I think I'm really proud of what it's become, and I really hope that it continues, and that students join, take it on, and that it continues for another 10, 20 years.
Yeah, this is great. I kind of now think I wish I knew about it when I was a lonely master's student working on Irish stuff by myself, basically. But oh well, yeah. It's too late now. But kind of to summarize, you're clearly such a motivated and high-achieving person in various aspects of academia. So what's in the future for you? Do you have any specific topics or projects that you're pursuing at the moment?
Yeah, so, there's various different things. One thing that I didn't mention earlier when you asked about other methodologies that I used is digital humanities. So that's something that I have done a bit during my PhD. I was working on textual tagging of texts using TI XML. And so I'd really like to keep going with this strand of my research, because I think it's really helpful to bring these texts to the digital age, as it were, and to understand them in different ways, and to allow them to be then reused for other types of research. So I really want to keep this digital side of my research going, because it's something I've kind of let slide in the past year or so. But I want to expand beyond the Agallamh. As we've said, I've become quite the Agallamh person, and there is a huge amount of work to do. But I would like to expand to other texts. There's so many things that need to be read that I would like to work on. I think a big part of my research now is also to bridge the gap the gap between medieval and modern Irish literary studies and textual studies. I think that there is such a continuity between the early modern and the modern, well, pre-standard period of texts and the medieval texts. And I think it's a shame that people don't really talk to each other. People who work on early medieval never really go look at what early modern people are doing, and vice versa. So that's really something that I'd like to do. So as Sean had said in an earlier episode of the podcast, this all depends on funding. It all depends on postdoc applications and things like that. So I will go where the money and the wind takes me, and I will try to do my best. But I have loads of exciting ideas. I'm applying narratology and things like that. So hopefully things will work out, and then I'll be able to do more research on all these things.
Yeah, well, hopefully there will be lots and lots of money for you everywhere you go. But just to conclude, and I guess following our long-standing tradition here, I want to ask you for some reading recommendations. So if listeners want to learn more about the Agallamh, or maybe the methodologies of literary studies, or just things that inspire your research, where should they go?
Yeah, so I have a list of things for people to read on. So for people who might, I guess, not be familiar with the Agallamh at all, then I would definitely recommend Kevin Murray's book, The Early Finn Cycle, which is basically an introduction to the Finn cycle of fíanaigecht. And he has a chapter on the Agallamh in this. So that's a good starting point. And it's also a very well-referenced book. So then you can go read other things using footnotes and bibliography. Then for the Agallamh, I mean, I'm a big fan of Geraldine Parsons. Her work is brilliant. She's really set the tone for literary studies of the Agallamh, and honestly, everything that I was doing in my PhD was just citing Geraldine every time. Her work is really fantastic, so I would really recommend. She's got loads of articles on the Agallamh that are available. And then for a more historical context on the text, I would recommend Anne Dooley and Anne Connann's work. They've both made extreme progress in understanding the historical context in which the Agallamh was composed. And there's a lot more stuff done on the text and stuff. So once you start reading those things, you follow the footnotes basically, and follow the trail. And then for the other versions of the Agallamh, well, I'll mention the Agallamh that I'm working on at the moment has been edited by Mhaonaigh, and this edition is available through the Irish Text Society. So for anyone who has modern Irish, I would say that the text is more or less accessible. It'll look archaic, but if you squint enough, you'll be able to understand it. So if anyone wants to read it and they have good enough Irish, then they should be okay. But Joseph Lahive has written an article that kind of summarizes at least what the text is about and the different strands of research associated with it. Then I'll just mention the Agallamh Bheag, the second Agallamh really. I'll just mention that it's been edited and translated by Julia Kuhns for her master's thesis, and that's available freely online if you Google it. So if you just want to read the translation, see what it's about, at least there's her master's available online. And then the two later Agallamh, so on Agallamh Nua and Agallamh Oisín agus Fádric, Siúla ní Mhórchu is the person who's worked on these two, so I would recommend anything she's written, and you can just look these up. And then for the other types of research, narratology I think is very daunting for people, especially in our field of studies, when it's not something you work on and it feels too much to tackle. So I would really recommend, there's a book called The Handbook of Narratology, and so there's articles that it's structured around themes, so you can look up characterization, narrator, metalepsis, things like that, and you can just look up, and they're really well structured, so they give a definition and then a rough history of what that has meant in scholarship, and then they give perhaps an example, and then things that needs to be studied further, and there's a short bibliography. So for every article like this. So it's really a great starting point if you don't know where to go. And that handbook has been published within a series of books on narratology published by de Gruyter Brill. So I would really recommend just looking through the books there. There's loads of great stuff, and there's a handbook of diachronic narratology as well, which was published in 2023. So that's a good place to start for people who do maybe more medieval stuff as well. Yeah, I think that's it. Long list of things for people, but yeah, it's, as always with academic readings, it's a question of following the trail of crumbs of footnotes, and you just keep going from there, and you start to see names reappearing, and then look up what they've done and what else have they done and stuff like that.
Yeah, true. Well, sometimes the footnotes lead you on such a rabbit hole that you never get out of it.
As we both know, yeah.
So we'll see. Maybe it will happen to some of the listeners. So thank you so much for such an insightful discussion of your work. Hopefully, people who listen will be interested in learning more about the Agallamh, or maybe they will even be inspired to start a dialogue between early medieval and early modern scholars. So thank you so much again for switching the seats on the podcast, and yeah.
Well, thank you for switching seats with me. Thank you for listening to Ní Ansa, the research podcast of the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, check out the description below. And for more information about the school, you can go to dias.ie. More episodes are coming your way soon. Slán!